I was about to put myself in a 5150 situation, but I was scared that all of that would follow me or that my son's father would try to take him from me by being, all of that. And so peer support was able to help me. So when I got into the outpatient, I immediately got busy finding out about what that was. And I was probably about 45 days sober when the desire of my heart of the Happier Life Project became like reality, and I was moving forward with creating a recovery community organization. That was what helped me.
This is Rock Bottom with Ryan. No sugarcoating, no filters. The pain, the chaos, the truth. No bullshit. Just recovery.
Hey everyone, just want to welcome you to another episode of Rock Bottom with Ryan. Once again, this episode is brought to you by Sober Strong Apparel. Sober Strong Apparel isn't just lifestyle wear, it's battle gear. Heavyweight tees, hoodies, hats, gear for ones who draw a hard line. Clean, sober, no compromise. We rep sobriety like a badge of honor, and every piece you throw on says you're a part of the crew that doesn't back down. And 10% gets donated to treatment facilities. 10% of every purchase. And use code ROCKBOTTOM, all one word, capital letters, ROCKBOTTOM, for 15% off at SoberStrongApparel.com. That's SoberStrongApparel.com. Use code ROCKBOTTOM for 15% off. Love what this company stands for. The style is incredible. The quality is amazing. Check them out. A lot of great options. Thanks again. Enjoy this episode. All right, welcome to another episode of Rock Bottom with Ryan. We're here with my guest today, Carolina. Carolina, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's really good to have you here today. And, we talk a lot about recovery on the show, and we know about the Happier Life Project, which we'll get into later. But first and foremost, we would love to know, what's your sober date? What was your drink or drug of choice? Where you're from? All that stuff.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Looking forward to this. And like you said, my name's Carolina. I'm a woman committed to long-term recovery. I have a recovery date of 2/18/2021, and very grateful for that. Drug abuse at the end of all of that was methamphetamine, alcohol. I have, used quite an array of substances, but that was the one that really took me to my knees, which was meth.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I'll be interested in talking about that today because we haven't had a lot of people on the show to talk about methamphetamine enough. It's a lot of alcoholism, but not enough history about methamphetamine, which I find is a very intense drug, obviously. So
It is.
yeah, so I'll be interested in asking questions about that. But would you take us back, a little bit to your past? Congrats on 5 years, by the way. That is amazing.
Thank you.
It's only a
Thank you.
couple of days ago. Wow. So what was life like growing up? Like, what was your family dynamic and all that before you started, going into any kind of use?
Okay. Well, I'll start. Good question. I'll start by saying that my use commenced around between 10 to 12, just so you know. I am first generation American, Latina, Spanish speaking, parents from Mexico. My parents divorced or separated very young. I think I was like 3 years old. We moved around a lot, firstborn, and my mom was young. And so in that she lived quite an interesting life in Mexico, just kind of from the family that she came from, as well, and her father and her mother. So there was a lot of intergenerational stuff already that was coming down the line with Carolina. And there was, unfortunately, physical abuse, very young, sexual abuse from just being very, very young. Started school early because my mom had to work. So there was this thing of kind of just getting documents to show that I was older than what I actually was, just to get started in school. And I did really well in school. That was kind of my outlet. I had a mom that was very controlling. It really tried to just keep everything in order as best, she could. We moved around a lot between Mexico and California and Texas. I was born in Orange, and I think it was probably There's a lot of blurs in between. Like, I think sixth grade was very impactful for me. I ended up being 2 years ahead once I started high school. I started high school when I was 12. I went to school a year in Mexico after dropped out of high school in Texas because I was hanging out, with the wrong crowd of people. I started sneaking out of the house. I really was a kid that asked a lot of questions, and adults didn't really care too much for that, and things just didn't make sense. And I was very like kind of emotional feeling, like things that I had no idea like what it meant. I actually thought that there was something wrong with me, and I was already seeing like a psychologist very young. I did attempt to take my life with some pills, in sixth grade, which, I talked to mom about it now, like what was going on then? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Kind of, it's just
Yeah.
kind of like swept under the rug, which was really, really interesting. But it was just a lot of crying out for help, trying to be who I wanted to be and not really being allowed to do that, and just freedom. All I remember is I just wanted freedom and
Yeah.
expression. And
And
that's
you
what,
were already go back into this topic, which is difficult. And if you're not interested in talking about it, I completely understand. But what ages did the sexual trauma take place? And was that somebody you trusted close to the family, or what was that?
yes. So it was an uncle, and I was 4 and 5 years old. So I was very, very young. And I would like to say that that was like the only time, but it wasn't. As I got a little bit older, probably about 9, also, it wasn't a blood related cousin, but it was somebody that I looked to like as a cousin he was in his kind of mid-teens also, and somebody that I really looked up to. So I kind of had this little like which is what I felt a lot guiltier about, because I had this, I really looked up to him, and I really, really loved him and liked him. And so there was that. And as I grew up in my teenage years and ran away from home, I did, while I was living out on the street, get raped.
Wow. Okay. I'm so sorry. That is, yeah. So, like, from three different circumstances and people, you were
Mhm.
assaulted
Yeah.
at three different, very like intense ages of development, too. So, that's extremely difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you think that played a role in the suicide attempt at such a young age?
When I had the suicide attempt, I remember exactly what was going on. So I used to like to take things from my mom, right? I would take things and I look back now, and it was like attention, right? Is what I was seeking from my mother. And I think it was New Year's, and she was now with my stepdad, and there was always drinking around the home, and like days of drinking. And my stepdad was an alcoholic. He's in heaven, resting in peace now. But his wallet came up missing. His wallet came up missing, and I was blamed for it. And I had nothing to do with it. And I really had nothing to do with it. So here was this kid that's been getting into all this trouble at home, right, for attention. And then something happens, and I get blamed, and I couldn't stand it, and I couldn't take it. But I was already seeing a psychologist, right? So it was kind of like, well, I was already in there for some reason, right? Behavioral issue. And I found the pills, and I took a bunch of them. And this was when I lived in Costa Mesa, Orange County. And I ended up at the hospital, and they had to do the charcoal and all of that thing for me. And right after that was when we moved to Texas, where things kind of escalated. Now I was more isolated in the sense of I didn't have other family around. Because at least in California, and again, bounced around, Mexico, California, Texas, I had family that could see that it was probably not the best thing for me be with the parent that I was with. And I wasn't seeing my father anymore at this time. He was not sure where he really was at. So growing up with, dad, like the fear, right? And the belief of I will be abandoned, I'm unlovable. And yeah, those are the core beliefs that I grew up with.
So, what was going through your head when you used the first time? Was it alcohol, or was it marijuana, or what was the?
It was alcohol. So alcohol, because I was the bartender, right? And so Hispanic families, Mexican parties, like all the time, it's just alcohol is everywhere. We had, the best of the best, and I would mix and do, or, grab the beer for stepdad, all of that. So sips around that, just trying it. The next was the marijuana, and I was in Texas. and I was in high school. And again, I was 2 years ahead in school. So I skipped a grade. And then because I started a year early, I was further advanced. And I remember going, the smokers would go across the street, and it was after PE class. And I think it was lunchtime. And so we went across the street, and there was a friend that I just thought the world of her, and I went with her, and everybody stood in a circle and they passed the joint around, and it got to me, and I just took a hit like everybody else did. And that was my first time. Like, I didn't say no. I didn't. I think I coughed my head off probably. I don't really remember. And just did it. It was just going with it. And so I would hang out with her. Her name is Jasmine. She passed away. We were both runaways together, and she was one that ended up getting killed with a gunshot to the head while we were runaways, which is very unfortunate.
That is insane. Wow. I'm sorry. So you like witnessed a lot of trauma growing up, like at a pretty young age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So much that it was like normal.
Yeah.
It was like very just like normal that does something to, talk about the resiliency factor, like wow, but it's a lot. It's a lot as a child, and not being able to discuss or talk, or of course somebody's acting out, right? Like looking at the behavior and why the behavior's there. But I remember talking to my mom about the abuse, and she didn't believe me, which is its whole other thing. She was physically abusive with me, but again, looking in retrospect, like she had some gnarly things that she went through with her upbringing that I'm like, okay, it makes sense.
Yeah, which doesn't justify it. And you want to break generational cycles, of course. But I just know that a lot of parents that grow up being abusive to their own kids, generally experience it themselves. I find out, and
Right.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So after smoking marijuana the first time and all that, how did it kind of progress into other things like drinking and stuff? And when you were drinking, were you enjoying it, like as far as doing it socially and stuff, or were you doing it to kind of numb some of the things you were experiencing at home at a
So
young age?
I did it as a party, right? Drinking was always as a party for me. Like the first time that I really, really drank, that I got to let loose, I was living in Mexico, and it was, other than the sips from like, making the drinks and stuff, I lived out there. My mom sent money for me. I was living with my stepdad's grandparents in a little ranch out there, and I got to celebrate my 12th birthday. And in that, what I did was I bought bottles for all the groups of friends that I had, and we, rented this little place, and I blacked out. I got to the point of blackout. I got carried back, to my grandma's home, and it wasn't this thing of like, oh, I can't wait to do it again. It was just kind of what happened, right? And it wasn't that I wanted to, drink again or whatever, but it was when I drank, I knew I was going to party. So even when I came back to the States, and I'd, leave school and I'd take friends over to my mom's house, we'd drink the wine. I remember going back to high school after lunch, and I was in world history honors class freshman year. And I was on the last side of the last row of the desk, and I was spinning, and because I was drunk, and I ended up throwing up in class. And it was horrific. I never went back to class again. I was so embarrassed, just so embarrassed. Yeah. Well, after that, hanging out with the same girlfriend of mine, Jasmine, she had a boyfriend that was 19 and gang affiliated, El Paso, Texas. And so we'd go hang out with the homies, and it was smoking pot. My next thing was cocaine, lines of cocaine. And it was my future husband's father that introduced me to cocaine. I got married at 15, by the way.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah. So I left home when I was in between 12 and 13, and then I just ended up getting married at 15. And so cocaine was the next thing. Tried things like Sherm, smoked crack, heroin, ECP, acid. Like it was just, I tried. If I didn't do it, it's because it wasn't around me. Period. I did everything that came around me. Yeah.
Tense. Those are really intense at that age too.
Yeah.
So you're hanging out with a lot of gang affiliated people, and so drugs were always pretty accessible and all that. And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
were you still able to maintain grades and stuff like that in school?
So when I left home, I would be able to stay, like we had different counselors. They would actually like take me in and let me stay at their house, and I kept going to school. And so that was kind of one of the issues, was that at that time, I'm how old am I? I'm 47. I'm 47 now. So this is, 12, 13. If I wasn't getting in any trouble with the law and I was still going to school, there was nothing that could be done for them to take me home. Right. Like the cops couldn't pick me up to take me home. My mom, I don't know if she had reported me as a runaway or what the issue was, but it got to a point then that I just wasn't able to get to school anymore. I just couldn't do it. And I dropped out. I dropped out.
Okay. All right. So how did your family and everybody were they aware of kind of what you were doing in your free time as far as partying and drugs and stuff?
Yes. I think there was a point, and again, there's there's like pockets of years that are kind of like blurry, right? There all this stuff that was happening and it's like, did this happen first? Did that happen second? I was put in a behavioral health center. But see, this was interesting. I was put in a behavioral health center before I ever picked up a drug, right? So again, there was something going on with Carolina, obviously from what I shared from before, where I was acting out behaviorally without using substances. And so I was put in a behavioral health center, Sun Towers, I remember, in El Paso. And after 3 days, they told my mom that I did not need to be there. And my mom didn't like that response. And she kept me there for 30 days. She kept me there for 30 days. Insurance wasn't going to cover it because she didn't know what to do with me. And that's where I actually was introduced to smoking for the first time there. I learned more about drugs, acid. There was a lot of Canadian kids there. And so I learned about acid and learned about all these things that I had not really known yet until I went into that behavioral center, which was kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
I had an uncle in California that does very well for himself, has a very successful business. Him and my aunt pulled me out and said, you're going to live here. Sorry, let me back up. I had another aunt that lived one street away from my mom. My aunt Elizabeth, and she's in heaven as well. She died in a car accident under the influence and of alcohol. She took me in. I was able to stay with her. She asked me, she had two little girls, my nieces, Lizzie and Laura, and she said, okay, look, you can stay here, but I don't want the little girls to see, this type of behavior. I don't want you sneaking out. I said, well, what about my friends? They smoke pot, can I have them come over? And she was like, fine. You can do that in the garage, but do not be sneaking out, just follow the rules. Well, why 2 days later, I'm jumping out of the second story window to go sneak out, to go hang out with the homies, get picked up in the middle of the night, and literally just to go over, it was my homeboy Chino, just to go to his house and actually just sleep. I just fell asleep at his house. And when I woke up, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get there. I was still trying to do the school thing at that point. And we went back and he was taking me home to my aunt's and the lights were on. She had two tall, big windows, big 2-story, beautiful home. And I could see the lights on in the house. And I said, keep going. And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. I felt such guilt and such shame that somebody that loved me, that cared for me, that took me in spite of all the behaviors that I was doing with my mom, living on the street, trying to bring me in. And all she asked was that I not sneak out. And I did it anyway. And because of that, I couldn't face it. So my life has a lot of those, I can't face it, so I'm going to run completely the other way. And my life completely went on another trajectory from that one decision because I couldn't own it. And I just felt so guilt and shame ridden of having made a bad choice.
How did life turn after that point then?
Well, yeah, that's when I was homeless. So I lived with different friends, gang members, people using drugs, families that, the parents, everybody lived at the home or everybody was in and out.
All the freedom in the world.
Yeah, I'd stay in abandoned houses. I'd break into abandoned houses and stay there. And one of those nights was when I was raped. I was leaving a party drunk and breaking into an abandoned house, and somebody followed me, and that's when I was raped. Had the bright idea. I was dating somebody, being with somebody, one of the homies, and he went back to smoking crack, which was something that he did not want to do because he'd already gone to treatment when he was 16. And he had the idea of he was going to move to Arizona with his Mormon family on his mom's side. And he asked me if I wanted to come with them. We were living at his father's at this time. A bunch of us lived at that home. It was a party pad, right? Drugs were sold, all of that. And I didn't want to go because I still wanted to party. I wanted to party. And I was like, no, I'm not going. And it took me about a week of being exhausted, being at the motels and just running amok, that I was like, okay, I want to go to Arizona. And I went and I met with him and we moved into his mom's home there. It was quickly, he was 19, I was 15. So the bishop of the church was like, you guys can't live together. You need to live in separate households or get married. And so it was like, okay, I guess we'll get married.
What?
He's also in heaven. He passed away from this disease.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I wanted to say something about that as I'm hearing myself share, like, there is a lot of grief, a lot of loss,
Yeah.
and none of that had ever been addressed
Okay.
either.
So you were losing people left and right, basically, but never actually like, soaking it in and actually dealing with it.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
were just
even just
continuing to numb yourself.
the trauma of like losing innocence, right? Like that is a loss to
Yeah.
be processed.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think we're better at it, but I don't think we address that enough within our recovery. A
Yeah.
lot of times people have a lot of losses that just didn't get processed.
Exactly. And it's not all just losing people, it's like, me, I'm also a survivor of sexual trauma too. And it's just kind of like a lot of us, we just choose to run and just, pretend it didn't happen or just avoid it. And, we're runners. So I've noticed that you just keep moving and try to block it out. And then finally, it's like I didn't start dealing with it until I actually got in recovery. So I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but like, yeah. So after yeah, I do want to talk more about the grief aspect as well. But after that, how did he pass away? Like, was it soon after you got married?
No, he passed away probably about 4 years ago. 4 or 5 years. Yeah. He had an alcohol problem and, we didn't stay married long. I walked out of that marriage at a year, like when I got pregnant with Danielle. And after her 1 year birthday, I didn't come home one night. We were having a company party. I was, working and kind of, trying to have a little success. And, I wanted to be this businesswoman like my mom was. And he wanted me home barefoot and pregnant. Right. And it just it wasn't working. And there was a company party. He didn't want me to go. And I went anyways. And again, guilt and shame around making that decision. I couldn't come home. And so a couple days later, when I came home, he had already packed up and left with our daughter and went to Mexico to the little Mormon town that they started to live at for a few years out there with his family. So that started a whole other cycle of me really diving into the alcoholism.
Okay. How'd that happen then? Can you describe how that progressed then?
Yeah, so we lived in an apartment complex. I didn't go back there. I started staying with friends that I worked with and they love to party, right? So there's people that can like drink, like and still like function. That was not my story. So I would just drink to no end to the point where I'm getting pulled out of jacuzzis, drowning, getting woke up, from my sleep, like choking on my own vomit. I was definitely promiscuous and having sex with everybody and anybody that I could. I was just like on a self-destructive mission. I was out to the after hour parties because I was still, underage and just figuring out how to get alcohol and drugs like every day kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. We were living in Arizona. He went back to Mexico. I stayed in Arizona in the Tempe area. And then I couldn't do it anymore. Like I'd burn out. I'd meet people. So I was very much one that would move here, make a bunch of new friends and then use all the resources that I could. And then I'd go to a new group and then do the same thing there, use all those resources until I just couldn't do it anymore. And I ended up going back to Texas, back to El Paso, which in between, there's like a whole story in between there, but I had a significant other that was very, very much abusive that I got with after I separated from my husband, and that was a whole other thing. I got put into transporting drugs across the border, getting, that was the whole nother experience of control. And I thought I was making all the decisions, right? Like I'm just a badass and I don't care. And
Yeah,
it
but you were
wasn't that.
manipulated and, I
Yeah.
no, I assume there was a lot of drug use in that relationship and very toxic, I assume.
Absolutely. Yeah. He had a girlfriend with another child, a wife in Germany with 2 kids, running drugs across the border, in and out of prison. And I was smitten and doing all of the crimes, that I probably won't talk about here because I didn't get charged with kind of things. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Statute of
Yeah.
limitations is over, but I totally get it. No, I totally get it. If I
Yeah.
was
I mean,
caught
it
doing
was
half the things I did, I would have multiple life
right.
sentences
It was like,
probably. So
I was literally doing armed robberies.
Yeah.
and like carjackings, like as
Yeah.
a kid, and thought I was just, I would cross the border every day with drugs in my car. It just was wild when I think back. So
Yeah.
disconnected from that life today.
No. Yeah. No, it's insane how things change, and looking back at it, it's like, how did I get away with that stuff? And how did I do it in the first place? And
Right.
yeah, I get it. So so you got into that toxic relationship. How long did that last? And how did your drinking and drug use progress after that? And what led up to methamphetamine and that issue?
Oh, cocaine really took off for me when I was with that second relationship. So I'd walked out on my husband and my daughter, abandoned that when she was a year old, did all the mess in Arizona, went back to Texas, got together with the second guy, was in a complete violent relationship, cocaine use every day, every single day. I learned how to get his cocaine and go with other friends that knew how to rock it up, right? I never learned how to rock up cocaine myself because I always had it. So I didn't want to learn how to do it. So I would go to, I run away and go to different places and do that. So what ended up happening was he all of a sudden made a decision one day that he was going to try to make it work with his wife in Germany. And I was like, okay, so I guess I'm going to try to go make it work with my husband in Mexico. And so I made that decision to go over there and quickly, learn that my husband and I did not need to be together. Another kind of violent relationship. He was alcoholic also, but I ended up getting pregnant when I was there. And I tried to kidnap Danielle when I was there. I had my brother send me some money. I tried to take her one day that he was at work, and it was a little Mormon colony. So it was very small and everybody kind of knew each other. And so I got caught and I didn't get to get away, and I left Danielle there, and we knew that I was pregnant. I had a miscarriage in between, and I said, okay, so you keep Danielle and I'll keep this one. And I went back to that man it didn't work out with his wife in Germany. He was back in Texas. So I went to go with him. He also had a girlfriend that was also pregnant. Our kids are 3 days apart, except she was pregnant with his kid and I was pregnant for my ex-husband, but he took me back. And that was a whole thing within itself, because every day that he would see me and as the pregnancy would grow, he knew it wasn't his child. So there was a lot of abuse around that. And I used the entire pregnancy. I acted like I was not pregnant, which is very, very
Yeah.
unfortunate. And that's my daughter, Krystal.
Wow.
And she was born early and she was born addicted. I don't know how CPS did not get involved in that situation. I ended up with a couple of arrests when I was 8 months pregnant, transporting 2 pounds of cocaine. I was 8 months pregnant, and I took everything. They released him, and I ended up getting arrested later when she was 6 weeks old. Our house got hit, and we had an excessive amount of marijuana in the home. And that's when I went back into the feds because I was out on probation. And my daughter ended up with his mother, who is also an alcoholic, who has also passed away. And I reached out to my mom in California and said, I don't know how long I'm going to be in here, and somebody needs to get my daughter, Krystal. So my mom was able to get her after a year. I was fighting my case and brought her out to California. When I got released in New Mexico, because I ended up in New Mexico, I got released to my mom. Had like a 5-year probation tail, did a little over a year for the possession with intent to distribute. Came home, and I had not lived with my mother since I was 12 years old. So there was this
Yeah.
whole
A
and
lot
she
of
has no
resentment. And
idea,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And no idea how to deal with me. And it was just very much like, okay, you're out, you have a kid, you be a mom, you get a job, and you do the things, right? Like that's what you do. And I thought that that's what you could do, right? I'm in a new place. I'm now in Temecula. Don't know anybody here. I'm away from that violent, gang affiliated domestic violence life. Well, I started drinking, with my brother's friends. I got out in January of 1999. Stoll's birthday, March 29th. She was born in 98, so she was going to be 1 in 99. By June 26th, I was going back to prison. I went out for a high school party. My brother and his friends, he was still a junior, but his friends that I was partying with, those high school, I took Krystal to the babysitters and went and partied at a hotel, got blacked out, somehow made it back to my friend Brenda's home, picked up Krystal from there, went to my mom's home, and went into the house and passed out. And I say that to say I did not take Krystal out of the car seat. She was sitting in my car when I drove back home to my mom's, and she stayed in there for 3 hours. And by the time I found her, she was dead.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
How old was she?
15 months.
Wow.
Yeah, she was 15 months. And I got to be there. You know, I was hysterical. You know, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I think I disassociated, you know, right then and there. And I could not remember what happened. You know, I could not remember what happened. I had not been doing any drugs. I remember the DA asking, you know, what drugs did you have in your system? And I said, I didn't. If I had drugs in my system, my daughter would be alive because I would have not have been in that blackout.
Yeah.
And they had said, you know, if we find drugs in your system, we're going to charge you a second degree murder.
Jeez.
And they didn't. You know, I had a 0.36 BAC. Uh, you know, I was probably a buck 10,
Yeah.
and I got arrested for child endangerment that resulted in death.
My gosh, that is crazy. What were the consequences of that, and how did you
So
process that?
yeah, again, blur. Rated. I was in the suicide watch. The initial charge was child endangerment. It was a few hours or a few days. I'd been working, so I knew I had some money, and I had conjured up the plan of like how I was gonna um, bail myself out and end my life. And I called the bail bondsman, and they're like, you know, okay, $10,000 bail, child endangerment. I was in a padded room, right? So in the Velcro suit and everything, a little hole in the ground to, you know, use the restroom. And he tells me he put me on hold. So I had the wallet because they gave me my wallet when they took me. He was going to come and get the money, get me out, all of that. And he put me on hold what seemed to be like an eternity. And he comes back and he said, honey, I don't know what just happened, but your bail just went up to $250,000.
Jeez.
And I cursed God at that time. Like I cursed God because I knew it was like this thing again. Like I had all of these times in my life where higher power, God, creator, universe was very apparent that I was not alone, you know, through all of it. And so it was here I had the plan. I had the plan. Getting
Yeah.
out, I know exactly what I'm doing. And something intervened and I was pissed. I was
Yeah.
pissed. I ended up getting 2 years for the child endangerment. It was like 246. They gave me a 2. I did not take it to trial. I ended up getting an enhancement for a great bodily injury from a child endangerment that resulted in death. I remember coming out to the day room one time from Suicide Watch once I got to move upstairs, and I was all over national television. And my mom and my brother were on TV, and they were saying how they could never forgive me and how I was irresponsible and how I was making bad choices. And this was a consequence of the bad choice. And I was devastated. I was devastated because I felt like nobody understood. And I was trying to live this like everything was fine, like there was no issue, there was nothing. And my brother was actually supposed to babysit that night. But he didn't want his girlfriend to go out with us. And so he chose not to. And that's where I ended up taking Krystal with me to go have her babysat somewhere else. But the whole thing was like, I had a plan. I knew I was going to go get, you know, effed up. And there was a babysitter. I wasn't driving my car. I was supposed to stay the night there. Like everything, there was a design. Like, and so with what happened, it was just devastating. You know,
Yeah.
it was devastating.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did 2 years then.
I did 3 years and 10 months.
Wow.
Yeah, I did 3 years and 10 months in Chowchilla, in Stockton, and in Chino for Women State Prison.
Wow. And then how old were you when you got out then?
I was 24. I got
Wow.
out when I was 24. I went through a psych eval to get out. I had communication with my daughter Danielle when I was in there. Didn't address any grief or had any therapy or any substance use classes because I didn't have any drug charges. So I didn't qualify for that. I had to have drug charges in order to qualify to get substance use help at that time. You know, that was what, 20 something odd years ago. I got out. I thought I was going to go live back at my mom's in Temecula and try to heal. And I had a parole agent that put stipulations on me that said I could not be around anybody under 18 years of age. So I couldn't be around my brother or my sister or my cousins or my daughter, or I couldn't call them. I couldn't write them. I couldn't text them. I couldn't third party them. I couldn't live with them. I couldn't be around. So I remember asking like, so what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to live? Where am I supposed to go? And she's like, figure it out. 2 weeks, have an address or you're going back.
Jeez.
And instead I was back 58 days later with a DUI.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you got back out, were you trying to kind of get things together and try to go a different direction, or you just immediately kind of go back into drinking and
No, 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 no. I was really trying to get a different direction. Again, at this time, I didn't know anything about addiction. I didn't know anything about recovery. I didn't know anything. Like, I thought, just like I did when I moved to Temecula, okay, I'm out of that situation. I don't like live like that. Right. And so because I wasn't drinking every day, what ended up happening before Krystal's death was I tried to make peace with my daughter's dad. So we had Danielle and we had Krystal. So I said, okay, I'm going to allow Krystal to go to Mexico to spend time with her father and her sister. And hopefully in that good faith, he will allow Danielle to come and spend time with me at my mom's so the sisters could, know each other. What ended up happening was when I did that, I got some freedom of responsibility. And what I started to do is I started to go out with a girlfriend and we'd be out clubbing, we'd be out partying. I'd show up to work like hungover. I was working at my uncle's company. My uncle has a wheel company, very successful, and I started working there. So I had the stuff, and it was that not having responsibility.
yeah.
So when she came back to put the brakes on that was challenging. And I didn't know what that was. So it was like, okay, take her to the babysitter, take her to the babysitter, take her to the babysitter kind of thing. So I could go out. So when I got out from prison and I thought I was going to go live with my mom, and that didn't end up happening. What my uncle did was like, okay, let's find you a room for rent. And let's be honest with the owner, let him know the situation. I'll pay 6 months in advance. You come to work with me. So we found a place. We did that in Riverside. And I was working with him. I just wasn't getting any support, right? I didn't know meetings. I didn't know any of that. So I was, started going back out again. And I went to a bar by myself, right? Just kind of like, what the heck is going on? And I didn't go off the right exit on the other way. And I had a beer and a half that night. And I blew a .08 when I got pulled over because there wasn't an exit. And I was so honest with the CHP. I was just brutally honest. I'm on parole. What happened with my daughter, all of that. Well, immediate arrest, right? Like immediate arrest. But they let me, take the car back to the home that I was living at that was literally half a mile down the road. So, that just violated my parole and all of that. And it started a whole other cycle. I don't think I was out for the entire year anymore since 2004. I learned about methamphetamine in state prison. And then I connected with people that I met in state prison and I started smoking meth when I got it. And I did heroin when I was in there because I had roommates that did heroin. And so you don't tell on them. They make you do the heroin. And that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how meth use started, was basically from being incarcerated is where you got the
Right.
idea. And then
Yep.
how did that go? Were you immediately attached to it, or did it?
Oh, yeah. I immediately went crazy. Like immediately went crazy, lost my mind, had psychosis, thought everybody was after me. People like I had this thing where I started meeting a lot of other people that use meth and I really didn't want anything to do with them. It was just like, it was not my crowd. It was not what I wanted to do, but the drug had a hold on. And so it was like, I was trying to live this double life of like, I do it, but I don't want to do it with you. Like I had all these judgments and all of these things. And so I became everything that I judged, everything that I judged. Yeah.
When did that last? And then like what led up to you deciding, hey, I'm done with this?
So I started in 2004. My first treatment was 2007. I went to treatment in Orange County. I actually had the owner's son get a scholarship bed for me because people actually that I got high with saw how painful it was for me. And they're like, why are you doing this if this is so painful for you? I found something that gave me torture, which is what I thought that I deserved after the death of my daughter. I thought I was never going to drink again. So when I was back on a DUI 58 days later, I was just a piece of shit. That's it. Bottom line.
Yeah.
Bottom line. How could I drink? Still no idea about addiction. Still no idea about what this whole thing was at all whatsoever until I went into that treatment center in 2007 for 30 days. And I was able to stay sober for about 7.5 months. I went into a sober living in Dana Point and I dove into the program of AA. I wanted to start NA. And I remember people saying like, isn't it like aren't you on parole? Like, aren't you not supposed to be around other like felons? It's like everybody at the NA meeting has a felony, right? And so there was this thing. I was like, okay, I'll just stick to the AA, to the AA model. And that worked for about 7.5 months until it didn't. Worked at a restaurant where everybody would drink afterwards. And I did the thing that they would say in the rooms, like walk to the bar, have a drink, and see what happens. And I did that. And the next day I was smoking meth in Laguna Beach. You know,
Jeez.
I found it in Laguna. I lived in a beautiful place down in South Orange County, and off I went again. And so then I just started cycling in and out of prison with possessions. And yeah, so I had that recovery journey. And then I had another one where I tried recovery. I was faced again with, I don't know, I probably had like 11 felonies. And this last time in 2011, I paroled from fire camp in 2010. And then in 2000, I was looking at 14 years in state prison for transportation and sales and all of that. And instead, I had a judge that actually gave me a joint suspension, 7-year joint suspension with a 2-year requirement to do treatment. And so I went into a program, did the dry out, did the intensive outpatient, got the job, lived at the sober living, and then ended up moving to sober apartments. And I completed that probation time without a hitch. And it was like, being held over my head. So I did really good with it. And then I think I stayed sober for about 3 years. And then I went back out. So this sobriety was 2021.
Okay. What would you consider your rock bottom moment then when you finally quit 5 years ago?
I had my son. He's 10 years old. His name is Tomas. And when he was born addicted. And I gave him to CPS. I was able to get him back, even after they told me that I was not going to be a parent because of what happened with Krystal. For whatever reason, I mean, I have full custody of him today. But I worked through everything that I needed to work through with Child Protective Services, and I got him back in a year. My mom always had him, so he never left the family, and I got to see him a lot. What happened through that time, it was another system designed to just check off boxes. And when I completed everything, I was back using. Yeah. And so being stuck in that after getting him back, then I really felt stuck. I was in another relationship with another human that used and could use normally, which sounds weird, could use methamphetamine like in a way that you couldn't even tell that they were using methamphetamine. I could not. I lose my mind, and I'm in complete psychosis and could probably be put in a mental institution. Another domestic violence relationship. I made a decision to go into treatment, and I got into a huge fight with my mom. She came down from Mexico. There was some violence. I saw my son. I saw his eyes, and it took me back to when I was a little girl and some of the violence that I saw. And instead of deciding to take my life again, I figured a way to get into treatment. I had to be dishonest about what I was using because they wouldn't detox me off of methamphetamine. So I had to say that I was drinking and taking pills and smoking some meth, in order to get in. But I was able to do that, go into a 5-day detox, get off of all of the psychiatric medication, and go straight into an outpatient. And then I connected with a recovery coach is what I did. I connected with a recovery coach and went back to AA, in a way that I could, thanks to the recovery coach. And then everything completely changed and transformed. And I had some very, what do you call it? I got help through peer support, right? That is how I was able to do what I needed to do. I was about to put myself in a 5150 situation, but I was scared that all of that would follow me, or that my son's father would try to take him from me by being, all of that. And so peer support was able to help me. So when I got into the outpatient, I immediately got busy finding out about what that was. And I was probably about 45 days sober when the Desire of My Heart of the Happier Life Project became like reality. And I was moving forward with creating a recovery community organization. That was what helped me.
Yeah.
And that's where it all started. Krystal is my angel. And she came through and said, Mom, you need to go forth with a nonprofit. You're going to help so many people.
Okay, I want to hear about it. How did the idea come about, and how did that turn into the Happier Life Project? How did that come about?
So happier life was always something within me. Like I was generally, regardless of all of the trauma, regardless of everything that I went through, I was always positive. I was always happy. I was always looking at like positivity. Like everybody's like, how are you always so happy? Kind of thing. And I don't know if that was like a facade or whatever, but I genuinely always felt something in my heart, and there was always some hope, even though, right? No matter what. And so happier life was already something that I had. When I was in the outpatient, I was in outpatient with other moms, and the moms had their kids in CPS, and I kept hearing from them. Now I'd made a conscious choice, not led by any other reason, right, than I need to get my life together now for my son. So I was in there voluntarily, and I would hear the women share about how they were going through the experience with their, worker and getting their children. And it was the first time that I shared about Krystal and what happened with her, and how, Tomas was taken away, how I gave him away, and how I had custody now. And so that just kind of culminated so many things of like, your kids are still alive. There is hope. Like, you can do this and you can get them back. And so from that peer support, from watching a documentary in that outpatient, from working with the women, the anonymous people, I learned about this different way to get support, because the county wasn't doing it. This outpatient that I was in was so outdated, so old, so deficiency based. I was like, okay, there's got to be more. When I started working with a recovery coach, it transformed my life to the point that I was able to go back into 12 step with a whole different view of what it was. I was able to then stay. So I had a recovery coach, I had a sponsor, I had a therapist, I had a parenting teacher, I had like everything that I could grab my hands on, I did. And I just started training. I started training within Faces and Voices of Recovery, learning, how to do this, how to build this, and step by step. And people would hear me in the meetings. They tell me, they're like, you sounded like you were crazy. Like, you would talk about all this thing that you were going to do and create this ecosystem and, family and kids and that and everything. And they're like, and you're doing it. And I dove into that because I still lived with a partner who was still using methamphetamine every day at home. And I did not leave the home. I stayed there for 17 months while he
Wow.
used,
While
was
sober.
still he.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my obsession became building the organization.
That's awesome. You channeled your addiction into something positive. That's amazing. So how did it start to grow? Like, how do people become a part of the Happier Life Project and all that?
Yeah. So we are located in Riverside County. We have a center in Lake Elsinore, a youth center and adult center. It started to grow. We got our first grant the very first year that we had it. I had some volunteers that were helping. They'd see me in the rooms and, want to know more about what I was doing, and quickly connected with universities for like internships. And we got our first grant that year. And that is what helped us, set up. Like, I basically got to write the vision on paper, which was something that was actually unheard of in the way that funding happened in the state of California. So it was very aligned with, like, it was just time. It was just time. And through that, growing with the state and supporting peer run organizations, I've been able to be a part of Faces and Voices of Recovery. So meeting other organizational leaders. We were born during COVID, so everything was telehealth. So building the website, using the Zooms, doing all of that, getting the trainings. I became a coach myself, a bilingual coach working for another recovery community organization. So at the same time that I was building it, I was doing it. So as I was learning, I was putting it into practice because I knew that there was a service, a delivery, a model that was happening that I needed to experience myself. I became a volunteer with the Phoenix, another recovery community organization. I became a chapter lead with young people in recovery also, and I brought all three together. I called us the trifecta. So I was able to build like some community. I was very much into holistic, and still am, the yogas, the breath work, the meditation, the physical fitness, the pro socials. All of us in the rooms, we always want to do things together, right? And then understanding like harm reduction. I needed support during the time that I was still using. And the fact that I was seeking out parenting classes, even though I was getting high, I wanted to be a better person, a better mother. And the fact that of that thing of like, no, you have to have stopped that in order to do this blew my mind. I just couldn't. And so I'm very much a believer of you support people wherever they're at. We all have a stage of change, and It depends on where you're at, on how we're going to meet you. And not everybody's the 40th person to be that one person that's going to change everything for you, or that you're going to make that decision like just that one date. It is a process. And every single time that I was able to engage with people or learn about, this thing, it was a little bit more, that I was able to draw off of. And that's what I believe with the Happier Life Project. Like there's no, you have to be this, you have to be that, you have to be here, you have to do it this way, no, it's like, what do you think? Nobody ever asked me, nobody ever asked me what it was. Nobody ever heard me. Nobody ever listened, beyond the behavior. The behavior speaks a lot, of what's actually going on. And so we have a website, thehappierlifeproject.org. Our social media, our marketing and communications is not the best. There's a lot that we do that we don't, put out there. We're getting to be able to start a podcast,
Awesome.
I had a lot of, and still kind of have a little bit of challenges that this is important for me to do this because I like to hide behind the organization also. And so I'm being called a lot more to speak up as an advocate, as a woman in recovery, and for a lot of other women that have found themselves in very similar positions that could have had a lot of tragic things happen that didn't, and it's a lot of that hard stuff of how do you look at yourself in the mirror with some of the things that we've done as mothers.
Exactly. No, and you're very relatable, I think, to them too. So you're a huge voice for women out there that have not only been through addiction, but had issues giving up their kids and things like that. All your experiences, they all add up, including the traumas from when you were a kid and everything too.
Yeah.
I think that's all helpful to them. So it's growing and it's becoming very popular around that area, and a lot of people are becoming a part of it. And you're a huge advocate for women in recovery. That's amazing.
Yes.
So that's what the Happier Life
Re-entry.
Project entails.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes. And so being a woman formerly incarcerated, and going through the experience of like my family not getting any support or understanding when we come back together and we reunify, like you cannot leave the family out of it, right? What is the experience like being away from my mom as a youth runaway, right? Getting married as a teen, going through the domestic violence relationship, being away from all of that, and then coming back after incarceration, the family has no idea, like nothing about what's even going on. I didn't even have any idea. So that's really important to me as well. When I got recovery and my partner did not, I had to find a way to, if I'm saying about meeting people where they're at, allowing them to have their own process. I'm living in the home with somebody that's not getting sober. And I'm thinking like, I got sober, so should you. I'm like, wait a minute, this is not, how can I practice what I preach? So I sought out and I found out things like craft, community reinforcement, and family training, because Al-Anon was not working for me. That just wasn't it. And that helped me have a different engagement and a different relationship with that partner. We're not together today, but he helped raise my son. Nonetheless, regardless of everything, a good father, even though he's not the biological father, still has a relationship with him. And we're able to communicate, right? And I was able to safely exit that situation through that support. So helping the family, being a Spanish speaker, connecting back with my roots, participating in my own ceremony with Sweat Lodge, Sundance ceremony, rooting in my history, where I come from. Because when I'm, don't even know who I am, it's very easy to just go everywhere and try to connect in something that I'm not. And so really going back within and knowing that the power has always been within me, which is mind-blowing.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. That's awesome. So it's on Instagram, it's the Happier Life Project, all one word. And then you said it was the happierlifeproject.com is the website?
.org.
.org. Well, thank you. So I'm really grateful for that and what you're doing for the recovery community as a whole, not just women, but just people in recovery, giving them an opportunity to like actually address their issues, not just look at, like you said, just the behavior, which speaks very loudly, but just what created that, where they stem from and all that. So that's important.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, recovery coaching changed my life. It does not replace whatever your methodology is of recovery, but even just that encompassing like multiple pathways, right? And that it doesn't have to be defined, one way. And when we become the responsible people, like I'm choosing to do this or I'm setting this goal for myself and you're helping me in the steps to attain it, I'm now responsible, right? I am responsible. So when I was consistently like guided on being told like you need to do this, you need to do that, there was a level of, for me, of like, being able to kind of get out of that if it didn't work. And it's like, well, I did it your way, it didn't work, whatever, right? Kind of, I'm no longer responsible when I'm giving that power away. And so there's a shift with that, because with it comes great responsibility, and you got to own your stuff, however small they are, to the incremental changes that you can make. And it's opened up so many things for me in my healing journey, with a lot of different paths and a lot of different ways of healing. And it's just a constant layer and levels, and like levels are real, layers are real, right? And it's just been a beautiful thing. I have a wonderful relationship with my daughter, Krystal. You know, like I'm constantly in communication with her, and she shows up. I just want to share this really quick. I was at a Red Ribbon Week at one of the high schools, right? And I brought the Narcan, and I got in trouble for bringing it because you can't give it to the kids or all of that stuff. I'm like, it's Red Ribbon Week and you guys invited us. What did you think we were going to do, right? Naloxone, fentanyl test strip. But there was this woman that was there as a partner, and I went up to talk to her, and her badge said Alexia. Now, Krystal's middle name is Alexia. And I know Alexis and I know Alexa, but I don't really see Alexia a whole lot. So I shared, about that. And then her partner came. She'd gone to the car and she came back and she stood next to her. And her badge said Krystal with a K. So I had Krystal Alexia right before me at this high school where I was doing this work of service with youth. Yeah, it was
crazy. Wow.
Yeah, and she does that consistently.
I believe in that kind of stuff. People call it superstition in a lot of ways, or whatever, or spirituality. I mean, my sister died of a fentanyl overdose almost 5 years ago, in about a week or whatever. I feel like in different ways I see signs. I'm like, give me a sign, and like something will come up. Where
There
I'm
it
just
is.
like, wow, she's watching.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. And she's up there. And my nephew Noah, he passed away March 17th in Scottsdale, Arizona. Bought a pill on Snapchat, and the second one was laced with fentanyl, 17 years old, and
Yeah.
died. And now my brother and his wife, find their purpose in what this is, and it's everywhere. So harm reduction is something that we embrace, overdose prevention and education for sure, and equipping the community, and access, right? Access without a bunch of barriers.
What advice would you give to people out there struggling, whether women, whether people coming out of incarceration, people addicted to different substances such as methamphetamine and alcohol? What advice would you give from your overall experience?
So it's kind of like a twofold thing, right? Is creating spaces and having organizations to connect with that are safe to share the reality of your situation. Right. So I used to have this idea I needed to be sober before I could go to the place that's supposed to help me get sober. Right. Or when I went to the peer support and I walked in and I said, can I be completely honest about my situation without getting into any trouble? Because when I'd call the county, right? So I was on, county insurance. I'd call the county and you had to call so they could place you somewhere, right? Hey, I need help. I'm using drugs. I need help. They start asking you all these questions. I'm paranoid already, right? And so the questions would start to get invasive. Do you have kids in the home? How often are you using? So by the end of that, I'm like, oh yeah, I only use on the weekends when my kid's at his dad's. And they're like, oh, you just need to go find a meeting. When I'm using so I couldn't be honest, right? Because it's like the county, right? Or it's the agency. Are they going to tell on me? Am I going to get a reporter here? So when I found the peer support from a nonprofit and I walked in, the first thing I said is, can I be honest about my situation without getting in trouble? They said, are you in any imminent danger? Or is anybody in any imminent danger? And I said, no. And they said, have a seat. And I was able to say, like, I don't even know if I'm showering, if I'm eating. It's like a miracle that I'm outside of my home. I have a small child, and I was able to hear myself with reality. And I had people that were able to guide me with the next step without judgment, motivational interviewing, and leading me back to that decision and that choice to take some very clear steps about what I was going to do next. And then I did it, And so when we work with people, especially mothers, and they don't want to be honest, right? Like they feel. And so we have to get on the level of like, what's really going on, right? What is really happening? Peer respite is something we're creating so people can come, and you don't have to be clean and sober, the words that are using, or, I don't like to use the word clean, but not on substances, non-judgment, and just being able to be honest about the situation and say what's really going on in order to be able to get the help. I think that's just super important because I don't think we have enough of that, of places getting help. Even if you're still, right, like connecting, just connecting, even if you're still in your use, like you're not alone. You're not alone. And there's not this like, you have to be abstinent in order to have connection.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yep. Perfectly
And
said.
so, yeah, that's what I think.
Oh, it's amazing, incredible advice. I really appreciate you sharing so much and so much detail and being vulnerable on my show. Like, I've needed that, and I really am grateful. So thank you. And I love what you're doing with the Happier Life Project. It's incredible. So thank you so much, Caroline.
Thank you, Ryan. Have a great rest of your day. All right, take care.
Rock Bottom with Ryan. No bullshit, just recovery.